Hello everyone, Pastor Howie here. We are continuing our readings and thoughts from the scriptures. We are in the book of Acts, chapter 21, verses 17 through 26. The NIV heading says, Paul's arrival at Jerusalem. So we've been reading about the Apostle Paul wrapping up his third missionary journey, heading back to Jerusalem. Heading back to the Middle East, heading back to his home territory, heading back to, but in particular, Jerusalem. So now he arrives. And we're going to find out that once he arrives in Jerusalem, this is the beginning of a fourth journey, this time to Rome. And his intention was to visit Rome. You read the book of Romans. He had never been to Rome before he wrote the book of Romans, but he expresses in that book that he has every intention to visit Rome. There was already a church established there, by whom we don't know, but Peter is never mentioned, so in the personal greetings at the end of the book of Romans, so it's hard to accept the idea, the traditional idea, that Peter founded the church at Rome. Although Peter died there, and so will Paul. But as we come close to the end of the book of Acts, there's quite an adventure ahead of us as we read through Paul's exploits. So let's read these verses. Acts chapter 21, verses 17 through 26, Paul's arrival at Jerusalem. And I think we're going to find in here what I believe is an error that Paul makes. And we should be cautioned by this example, this historical accounting, that we not make the same error, which all of us, in one sense or another, from time to time, are often tempted to make. So let's read. So Luke is still writing in first person, so he is part of this party in Jerusalem. When we arrived at Jerusalem, the brothers and sisters, that is the Christians, received us warmly. The next day, Paul and the rest of us went to see James. So James has become the leader of the church in Jerusalem. This may or may not be, it is not the James, the brother of John. He's been martyred. It might be James the Less, as he's called in the list of the apostles, but there are a lot of people who believe this is James, the brother of Jesus, and it's possible they might be one and the same person, but James is the leader that's spoken of. They went to see James. Again, Peter's not in the picture, apparently, and we don't know from the scriptures where he went from there. We do know he died in Jerusalem, because that's what Jesus told him that would happen, that he would be crucified. Although we don't know, I said Jerusalem, he died in Rome. But he's not in Jerusalem at this point, and we don't see much about Peter anymore. This is all about the rest of the account of the book of Acts is centered on the Apostle Paul and his trip to Rome and his imprisonment and his ministry along the way. So they went up to see James, and all the elders were present. Paul greeted them and reported in detail what God had done among the Gentiles through his ministry. And remember that one of the problems Paul had every place he went was Jews who persecuted him because of their unrepentant hatred of the Gentiles, or at least their prejudice against the Gentiles. So he reports to the Christians about his ministry among the Gentiles. When they heard this, they praised God. Then they said to Paul, quote, "You see, brother, how many thousands of Jews have believed." Remember, the first believers in the way, the truth, and the life of Christ were the Jews. 3,000 were baptized, or perhaps more if women were included. 3,000 were baptized on the day of Pentecost. And they were all Jews from all over the then known world, the Roman Empire. And so they praised God when they heard this. But you see, brother, how many thousands of Jews have believed, and all of them are zealous for the law. Well, what law? The law of Christ? Or were they still dragging around the traditions that they grew up in and not letting them go? That was a problem. It was hard, and it is hard. It's hard for us to leave the world that we knew before Christ behind as we pursue, even after decades, as we pursue following the way of Christ. They have been informed that you teach all the Jews who live among the Gentiles to turn away from Moses. That, of course, is not true. Paul never turned away from Moses. He quoted the scriptures. He quoted the books of Moses, and he quoted the other Old Testament scriptures to show them that the scriptures reveal to us Christ, but never turned them away from the law of Moses. Telling them not to circumcise their children or live according to our customs. He never did that either. So all the Jews, he was teaching all the Jews, supposedly, to turn away from the law of Moses and to stop circumcising. He never did. He told them that the scriptures that they trusted in revealed Jesus Christ and that they should turn to Christ. He preached the gospel. What shall we do? They ask in verse 22. They will certainly hear that you have come and do what we do what we tell you, or what we suggest. There are 4 men with us who have made a vow. So 4 men, apparently professing Christians, who are still living according to the ritual laws of the Old Covenant. There's a difference between Old Covenant and New Covenant. Jesus makes a specific claim at the Last Supper when he holds up the cup of wine and says, "This is the blood of the new covenant. Drink ye all of it." So Jesus ushered in the new covenant and made the old covenant obsolete. And it was really difficult for people, even Christian people, who had grown up in Jewish tradition to leave those obsolete traditions behind. So we got four men who have taken a vow, and they're suggesting that Paul take these men, join in their purification rites, and pay their expenses so that they can have their heads shaved, part of the ritual. Then everyone will know there is no truth in these reports about you, but you yourself are living in obedience to the law. They're asking Paul to step back into Judaism that he knows is obsolete. As for the Gentile believers, we have written to them our decision that they should abstain from food sacrificed to idols. That's the letter that was written earlier in Acts. We read about that meeting and about that letter that was to be taken back to Antioch and published amongst the Gentiles. That they should abstain from food sacrificed to idols, leave their paganism, from blood, from the meat of strangled animals, and from sexual immorality. But they weren't teaching the Jews to renounce their circumcision or stop circumcising. Paul's whole method was to teach that Jesus is the Messiah. That's all he taught. That was his focus. He preached Christ. So these rumors are not true. And I think this is the mistake that Paul made. The next day, verse 26, Paul took the men, purified himself along with them. He stepped back into Judaism and its rituals. And yes, he was a part of that. And perhaps he saw that there was no harm done in that. But still, if Christ is now the Lord of the new covenant. And Paul is preaching the gospel of the new covenant and showing that Christ is revealed in the old covenant as a precursor to his actual birth and his ministry and his death and his resurrection. And Paul is actually compromising a little bit, and maybe he shouldn't have done that. Then he went to the temple to give notice of the date when the days of purification would end and the offering would be made for each of them. I think he made an error. Within the providence of God, it was an error that would ultimately get him to Rome to preach the gospel. But I still think it's an error. And I think we should be warned that we should be careful, if we're following the new way of Jesus Christ, not to step back, even for a moment, into the old way of thinking. So we should learn from this, and we should see, though, how all of this works out to get the gospel and the chief apostle, if you will, of the gospel to the Gentiles, to the capital city of the Gentile world, Rome. That's what I have for you to think about. So think about these things. And until next time, may God bless you.